let's move on to the correlation module. So correlation is one of those things that often there's a lot of discussion about. You know, should things be correlated? Is the central limit theorem a big issue on our project? Those sorts of things. And in older tools like Primavera risk analysis, you would correlate activities together. But here, instead, what we do is we correlate risks together. So the idea is if one risk happens, what's the probability that another risk is going to happen? And by doing that, it gives us a lot of flexibility in the modeling. So let me just simplify this because there's a lot of information here. I'm just going to show the pre-mitigated risks. And what I'm going to do is, in this case, I've got an impact for probability that risk is going to occur, the impact if the risk does occur on schedule, and then also on cost. So the idea here is it gives me a grid pattern, and I can choose to correlate any two risks together. Now the dark line down the middle is the intersection of the two, the identical items on the same, or the identical items in the two axes. That's why they're grayed out. But I can enter all of these in, so I can say, okay, you know, if we have trouble with driving piles, we're probably going to have trouble with excavation because probably the soils report is bad. So it gives us a lot of capability in terms of doing our correlation. And it's very flexible and very easy to work with. The next tab over, which is the script tab, gives us the ability to put our own custom code into a risk model. So many years ago, Primavera Risk Analysis had this using a Visual Basic function where you could say, okay, for example, you know, if I'm a certain percentage complete on my project, I can complete the project maybe while it's in transit to the job site. And so what you can do is you can evaluate as the model runs different scenarios and change the way the model works based on those scenarios. In the case of Primavera Risk Analysis, people really liked that function because it gave a lot of flexibility. But eventually they broke it because they no longer had an agreement for licensing around the Visual Basic model, so they just turned it off. So it stopped working, and it frustrated a lot of power users of Primavera Risk Analysis. Well, here in Safran, it's available, so we can use it. All right, so let's go to the Analyze tab. Now, I mentioned before that I can have pre- and post-mitigated positions for any of my risks. So here in the Analysis tab, I can choose whether I want to run a pre-mitigated or a post-mitigated position for any of my risks. Now, this is really good because I'm working with a client right now where we're looking at a lot of different scenarios. So what happens if we don't get this permit? Well, we run the model with the permit turned on. What happens if we want to completely remove that risk and run the model? Well, we can turn the risk off completely by clearing the checkbox. What if we want to run in the post-mitigated position? Well, we can just change the radio button from pre to post. And we can do all of this various scenario analysis very quickly and very easily in the tool. So it makes it very powerful. The other thing that I can do, and for those of you who worked with risk analysis tools before, it's oftentimes you don't really care about the final activity in the entire schedule. What you care about is perhaps the finish of construction or the finish of commissioning. And there might be, after those activities, there might be a whole bunch of demobilization and site cleanup and all sorts of crap that you don't really care about in the risk model. What you care about is when is construction finished, when is commissioning and startup finished. So I can create what are called focus activities. And focus activities just lets me go into the schedule and choose any particular activity that I care about, and I can make it a focus activity. When I do that, this activity then becomes available for me to very quickly go to. Similarly, I can do that for my costs off my cost worksheet as well. Now, I'm going to just set these all back to run my pre-mitigated position. Now, the other thing I can do here is I can tell the system that I want to step through the analysis. And this is pretty much common with most other tools out there. But when I run the analysis, what it's going to do is it's going to take me to the Gantt chart, and it's going to let me see on the Gantt chart exactly what's going on. So I can move around in the chart, and I can see what each iteration is doing. Let me just see if I can move this dialog box out of the way. Come on. It's not going to let me. Okay. So so as I step through my iterations, I can see each time I click, I can see that the schedule is moving the way I expect it to move. Okay. Now, I can continue to do this until I'm convinced, there we go, that I'm convinced that everything's working properly. And I can basically step through the model. I want to make sure that all my activities are moving the way I expect them to. I can scroll up and down in the model, and I can step around. Again, just making sure that everything's working the way I expect. When I get tired of doing the steps, because I told it to 1,000 iterations, I'm not going to click 1,000 times, I can hit complete. Now, when I do that, the system runs, and it will come up with my distribution graph, which essentially shows me the results of my analysis. Now, just a quick orientation for anybody who may not have used one of these before. Essentially what the system is doing is it's telling me how often each particular date on the y-axis came up in my 1,000 iterations. So on the left y-axis, it says 0, 50, 100, 150, 200. That's the number of times the date on the the date on the x-axis across the bottom came up. So for example, if I was to say, okay, here's 2015, September 1st, it came up about 50 times out of 1,000 iterations. Now, the line drawn here, the black line that goes up, represents cumulative hits. So essentially what we can say is that if we look at our 50% line here, 50% of the time we finished on or before December 29th, 2015. Okay, so it's saying that 50% of the hits happened on or before this particular date. Now, if I'm looking for a P70 or P80 value, I can go up and say, okay, my P80 value is March the 2nd, 2016. I can see that there. Okay, so the system gives me a lot of information in here about when I'm likely to finish. Now, as I mentioned before, I can choose my focus activities. So I can click on focus activities and choose the ones that I care about, and I can see the distribution for those activities. Or if I want to just wade through the whole schedule, I can do that as well. I can actually go in and choose any particular activity in the schedule and see what the distribution looks like for that particular activity.